find this. Anybody else? Just raise your hand because I passed these out before school, so I might have missed your day. Anybody else not have this? Anybody else? Got it? Okay. All right, so I'm going to start over because I forgot to record. So we're going to look at the one-pager first. We're going to save the one-pager this year for important people, important individuals, or important groups of people, or main ideas. Since we're doing the cheat sheets this year, we don't necessarily need to do quotes and things. So on that step one where it says choose one of the quotes, I'm giving you the quote this time. So we're going to do colonial identity. And again, this is the chapters where we move from thinking that we're Englishmen to something different, that we develop our own sense of identity. And so on this one pager, which this time, just again to make it easy, everybody's got the exact same one pager. As we start moving forward, I think there's 6 different templates back over there by the yellow box. I'll let you choose, but just for the sake of everybody having the same, that we can talk about it, I gave everybody the same. So the first long rectangle is just where you'll write colonial identity. I would also make sure that you know this is from chapter 5 and chapter 6, because always what you should be thinking about, again, is reviewing for tests. So there will be specific things that I think will be really important that you maybe think about putting in a separate place in your binder, and it would be the one-pagers and the cheat sheets, because those, again, we're doing obviously, again, to help learn material, but we're also creating study material, and we'll use that as we move into April as we get ready for the AP exam. So that's colonial identity. On this one pager, what you need to do through a series of short sentences or short phrases and pictures, because again, visual is really important, and color, is create how we moved and how we created this colonial identity, as well as what this colonial identity is. That is the entire purpose of chapters 5 and 6, is how we moved from chapters 1 through 4 as these proud English British citizens to this group of people that are ready to commit treason. Because again, we have to think of this, because we know how this all ends. The whole act of the Revolutionary War was treasonous, and if it didn't turn out the way that it turned out, there would have been a whole lot of dead people. A whole lot of dead people, like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, dead because they're committing treason the entire time. So what changed to allow these people to think of themselves as separately from British citizens? And it's not as easy as a thing as you think it will be. So that's what we'll think about as you're doing this one pager. So all of these things need to be filled up. You need to think about certain things, and somewhere on this page, hint, hint, should be something and lots of stuff about the French and Indian War. That is the thing that's going to change the way we think about ourselves and the way that we think about these new colonies that are being created. Our next one is, I'm just going to go through this. The reading worksheets, Great Awakening worksheet. Great Awakening worksheet, you're going to have to probably use more than your, you're going to have to really use your textbook on that one. So make sure, and more so than the lecture. So make sure you really look at your textbook on the Great Awakening worksheet. And it is a religious awakening, and it is about changing the way Puritans control religion, and we're going to move out of that sphere. And Voices, chapter 3 and 4, the one pager, the cheat sheet, and then that immigration worksheet. When you look at that immigration worksheet, again, what you're looking at is trying to make sure that you understand why and where each one of these colonies would be originate, or where they would go based on the origination of that colony. So, like for instance, Scotch Irish Highlander fleeing from English persecution. Anybody want to take a guess where they go? That'd be North Carolina. They go to North Carolina, those Appalachian Mountains, which if you go there in certain times, you can still find Highland games where they walk around throwing that big old pole that looks like a utility pole and show up in their clan gathering. That is all throughout the Appalachian Mountains because the Scotch-Irish are getting away from the persecution of the English. There's not a lot of places that you can escape that persecution in the colonies. North Carolina is one of them. So that would be your justification that North Carolina was a colony for dissenters, so people who didn't want to be part of the Church of England. So that's what you're looking for. And again, remember when we're doing charts, I'm not specifically looking for big long paragraphs, but you do need to make sure that you're justifying where they would go. A couple of these might go to more than one place, so don't necessarily think that there's only one big giant answer. And then our cheat sheet is dual for North America. This is chapter 5 and chapter 6. And again, chapter 5 and chapter 6 are really, really, really important. It's hard, I think, as, and I will challenge you as all throughout to think of this as, I don't know how this story is going to end. That's always the difficult part about teaching U.S. history is we already know how the story ends. So I'm challenging you to think, like I just did, hey, what if we hadn't won? What would have happened to George Washington? Instead of being this revered founding father, he would have been strung up as a treasonist because that's what these men are committing as they move forward with this rebellion. And again, in my U.S. history class, in my very diverse high school, we had British people and French people and obviously American people. And half of the year, my class was taught by a British lady, and the other half of the year, it was taught by an American. So it was very, very interesting. My favorite people were always the Canadians, because they got this whole different slant of all this thing, and especially the number of times that we try to invade Canada. I mean, we try a lot, and we are never, ever, ever successful. So that was a really interesting way to take U.S. history because it really did challenge, again, a lot of us to think really differently about what our common history is. So, and then tomorrow, please remind me that we really do need to go over lesson 2, our skills worksheet, because that is, if you look, Friday is our first SAQ practice. So, yeah. So make sure we go over that. Yes. You don't have any? Oh. That's why. Okay. It's right up here. Let me see if I can reach long. I don't have to put a mask on. There we go. All right. So, here's where we begin. All right, folks, before we move into, again, this is 2 chapters. First chapter is, we're going to look at colonial life, what it looks like right before. And then chapter 6 is the real important part of this, our colonial wars. And because we like to tell, historians like to add things to make things interesting. One of the important little tags that follow the French and Indian War is the war that made America. The French and Indian War is quite possibly the most important thing that leads us to this idea of revolution. And it will be what sets up our colonial identity. So please make sure, again, if there's not anything else, that you read and pay really close attention to chapter 6. Chapter 5 is just, again, developing our society and developing what we have grown into with these 13 colonies. A lot of it's really, really important. A lot of it is just nice information, and I'll try to point out which ones in particular are really important. One of the things that is really important is on that very first page, our population growth. we have a gigantic population explosion. Those first founders, especially in Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay Colony, they had like 10, 12 children. And for the most part, most of them survived. So we have a very different demographic in the colonies in that we live longer and our children are healthier. And that has a lot to do with wide open spaces, fresh air, not a lot of industry here yet, access to good food, and again, we're spread out, so we're not all on top of each other spreading diseases as easily and quickly as some of the towns and the large cities in Europe. So that demographic results in a balance of power shift between the colonies and England. We will soon surpass the population of England, which again will be very important as we move into the Revolution time. So by 1775, and that target date 1775 obviously makes sense because that's the American Revolution, we have 2.5 million people, with about 20% of those as Africans, blacks. We don't distinguish yet in that 20% how many are free and how many are enslaved, but we'll look at those as we move closer to. High fertility rate. We are having a lot of babies. And not only are we having a lot of babies, a lot of them are surviving. Our infant mortality rate is fairly high. Largest colonies will still be Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Maryland. And North Carolina, again, it's because the state where everyone goes if they're being persecuted by someone else or if they're poor. Because North Carolina is not going to have giant plantations. They're not going to have this aristocratic society. So it is a high draw area to those poor dissidents, especially those of Presbyterians or any of those other people, because there's a high Western North Carolina Presbyterian group that will go there as well. We do only have 4 major cities, and for whatever reason, the College Board likes to ask you about these 4 cities. So please kind of try to commit them to memory. The only one that should maybe be a difficult one to remember is Charleston, because it's our only southern one. Charleston is South Carolina. Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and Charleston. Again, only one of those is in the south, and it's Charleston. It's a deep river port, and it will be in South Carolina. Still, 90% will live in rural areas, 80% by the American Revolution, and we're going to hold on to that statistic until we get out of the Civil War, that most of America will be rural in nature. So we've got this idea of America as this melting pot, this place where people come and live side by side and create this great new region called the 13 colonies. Most mixed population in the whole world. And probably that still holds true in the 21st century, that our community, our country is more diverse than many other places. A lot of European countries are moving more to what our country looks like, but at this point, most mixed. South will hold 90% of the slaves. Please, please, please look at 2B. And if you miss this on the test, pound it in your head. New England, the least ethnically mixed, religiously mixed. These are all people that are the same. New England are people that are the same. We don't want outsiders. All of our hatred of Catholics begin in and around Boston by Puritans. They hate anything popish. They will burn effigies of the Pope. They will do all of these things. So New England is not welcoming to people that don't look like them. It is the reason for this thing called the Great Awakening. And I'm going to say this as delicately as I can possibly can. please do not confuse the history that you learn in Mrs. Hollis's class with the history that I am teaching in here, because it will get you in big mixed up trouble. So, as delicately as I can, you need to remember the history that you are learning in this class is the history that you need to recall in this class, especially information about the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening is an overthrow of Puritan ideals and this restriction that the Puritans hold on these things. Okay, please remember that. Middle colonies, most ethnically diverse, Pennsylvania. So when we begin our march to the idea of committing treason, two places are going to have a big hold in this. Massachusetts, because that's where most of the atrocities will be happening, and Philadelphia, because this will be where that idea of legislation comes from. We are going to approach war like, as Americans, we approach everything with two prongs. One, this legal legislative way of writing things like olive branch petition, writs of correspondence. You don't need to write any of these down yet. The Declaration of Independence. We're going to go all that track, but at the same time, we're going to be tarring, feathering, committing acts of treason, pouring hot burning tar and scalding people, burning governors' houses, destroying property. We're going to do all of those things at the same time. So the middle colonies are important for that legislative act. And our population breakdown, English, Welsh, 66% of the population. So again, most everyone in this room probably has some English heritage. Almost everybody in this room probably has some Germanic heritage. Almost everybody in this room probably has some Scottish or Irish heritage. It's almost impossible unless ethnically you're an old immigrant or a new immigrant. So if you are a new immigrant and your family came in the 1800s, you're separate. But if your family's been here for a long time, you probably have all of these things mixed up in you. So at this point, I'm going to encourage you to really ask your parents, what are we? Where do we come from? What's our last name? How did we get to this place? Some of you have really unique last names. Some of you have very regular. My background, like my granny's family, her name was Hines, which is a little bit different. But also Jones and Smith and Capps, like the most common names of the world. The only real ethnic thing that I have, not an Indian princess, as my dad told me, is Greek. My dad's family are Greek. So, and they don't come until the turn of the century. But for most of us, and again, if your family's done any of your DNA heritage, you would know the vast majority of mine is Irish, which the fact that I'm from North Carolina falls right into that immigrant thing. So bless you. It also falls into the redhead thing in my family. If you go to one of my family reunions, it is either people with dark hair like me or red hair. My mom had red flaming hair, red like orange hair. And she had 3 daughters that had dark hair, and each one of them has a redhead except me. I kind of got a strawberry blonde chick. And I think that goes with my husband's Polish kind of stuff going on, how that all. So ask your family. Some of you already know. Some of you have very unique last names. Still don't know. I think yours is it German, but it's Peel. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I was going to say Polish, but German's the same. It's the same, I mean, not same, but the same kind of, but do you know when they came? Okay, because you know, and that's the other part, right? When we say German, we know it's not really German, right? That they really came from very specific places like Bavaria or Pomerania. Because if they're German, they probably, if you have German, like almost probably every single person in here, you know that they probably came in and around after the 30 Years' War to get away from that, or they came second wave of immigration when Germany was becoming Germany. So that would have been the late 1800s. So check around, ask, make sure. It's very interesting, especially so like I don't know how long ago this was with Jenny, and her family was from Poland, and I said, so you're not Catholic? She's like, well, no, we're not Catholic. I'm like, you need to find out what happened, because if you're Polish, you're either Jewish or Catholic. She goes, no, we're not Catholic. I'm like, you need to find out. So sure enough, she asked, and then that's exactly what happened. It was hard to be Catholic in America in the 1910s and the 1920s, and when we get to there, you'll see why. And so some of these Polish people will drop their Catholicism. Some of them will drop, like, remember Jack, Connor, and Zane? I said the same thing. Connor, are you sure you weren't an O'Connor at some point? No, we've always been Connor. You should go ask. So yet they go ask. Being an O'Connor was really, really hard. So they dropped the O and just became Connor, because it was really hard to be an Irish or a Scotsman when you moved into the New World. Irish need not apply. Irish were treated horrifically around Boston. So find out, pay attention to either what your last name or even like religion and those things. So ask. And I'm sure you'll be amazed at the stuff, especially if you ask your grandparents or your great-grandparents, who they would love to talk to you every single day. So make a point to talk to them every single day. We got our Scotch-Irish and our Highlanders, Presbyterians. And again, to see thousands will come to America, mostly Pennsylvania. Why? Pennsylvania, the most advertised colony. And when we say advertised, that's exactly, they were sending out things like, think about it like that shopper that you get every week. That's what they were sending out and around Europe. Come here, be free, worship freely. And that is at the time, those of you that remember in AP Euro, religious wars are everywhere. And so this becomes a really safe place for people to come to. Page 2, Germans fled religious persecution. Again, that is mostly in the 30 Years' War. Most of them are Lutheran, and here is why this is really important. On page 2, they're Lutheran, not loyal to the crown, and they settle in Pennsylvania. So that is why Pennsylvania becomes a big leader. They have no loyalty to this person named King George. I don't think of myself as a British citizen. I'm a German, I'm a Lutheran. I don't really care about this King George person. And if we recall correctly, most of these German principalities never really had kings. So that's not something that is conducive to these German people. We'll have a little bit of Dutch, a little bit of Irish. The Irish are really going to come during the potato famine. And very, very, very few French. Why? Because France is the place to be. I have no reason to leave France. It's the best country in the world. Why would we leave? We are not. So we don't have a large French population. Even into the 21st century, the United States does not have a large French population. If you are French and you are not Catholic, like my Andres a couple of years ago, Huguenots, that's why you left, because you were Protestant. But very few French people really settled, mostly because they got this big giant place called Canada that they go to for a long time before they come here. All right, our structure on page 2 is that word stratification. If you don't know what stratification means, that's layers. It's like rocks. It's stratified. We try really hard to think that we are not stratified in layers of society, but we are. It's embedded, it's entrenched, it begins as early as and up to the 1750s. We have a very small upper class, and again, that is the goal of the upper class, right? To keep it small and to keep everybody else out. Because as soon as people start moving into that upper class, we got to find a way to get better than them. Does that make sense? So we're always going to try to deal with this small upper class. How do you get in there? We're not going to tell you. You certainly can't get in here very easily, because we upper class people are only upper class because there are people below us, right? And as soon as those people below us start to move up, we got to figure out a way to rise above them. And so that will be that stratification that we're always seeking. The people underneath are always trying to move up. The people at the top are doing two things, trying to keep them out and trying to figure more ways to move up. That's the way that works. Forever and ever and ever. That's how it works. Aristocratic prancers are certainly in the upper middle class, and then in the colonies, merchants, lawyers, officials, clergymen will be upper middle class. Please make sure you put clergymen in the upper middle class. Yeoman farmers, and a yeoman is somebody doing something for the first time. A yeoman is a new person or a newbie, borrowing weird words. So like, for instance, in the United States Navy, a yeoman is a one-striper. It's an E1, yeoman. You don't know anything. So you're brand new at what you're doing. These are yeoman farmers. This is what brings people to the New World, the ability to buy land. If I am a German lower class person in Bavaria, there is no way I'm going to get land. Ever. There's no way that my children are going to get land. There's no way that my children's children are going to get land. And so when this place in Pennsylvania sends me a flyer that says I can have land, I'm gone. I'm gone yesterday, because that's something that will never happen. And I think I mentioned this in our last chapter. It's something that still amazes a lot of foreigners when they come here, that as a foreigner, without citizenship, I can buy a house and I can buy land. It is not something that other countries allow. Certainly not in 1776, and even in the 21st century. There's a lot of countries that you move to that you're not allowed to purchase or buy land if you're not a citizen of that country. Small merchants, manual workers, hired hands, again, won't own land. That will be their desire. That will be what they save, scrape to do. Indentured servants, and I just use that term jailbirds because my granny always used that term, jailbirds. Again, will flock there. But here's the most important statistic. Americans, on average, had the highest standard of living in the world by the beginning of the 18th century. So in less than about 80 years after forming these 13 colonies, Americans had the highest standard of living. That's also a reason and a big flag waving to people living in Europe. Come here. It is so much better. You'll live so much better. You'll live longer here. You have opportunities here. And again, that really hasn't changed that much. That's kind of sliding standard of living in the last few years or so, but still better than most. So how did we get to this higher standard of living? And a lot of it is trade, and a lot of it is natural resources. The United States has some of the most natural resources of any place in the world, and I think the only continent to rival us is Africa. That's it. And Africa rivals us because they got diamonds and gold, right? We don't really have diamonds and gold. We got other precious resources. But as far as natural resources are concerned, the United States, to the best of my ability, still maintains one of the highest percentages of natural resources. Even though it feels like we've used a whole lot of ours up, we still have lots and lots of natural resources. We have an entire state that has less people than the city of Indianapolis. That would be Wyoming. There's hardly anybody that lives in Wyoming. It is a wide open state. It is a gigantic square state with a population of less than 600,000 people. Less than 600,000 people live in the entire state of Wyoming. It is wide open. Wide open. All of those states in our greater upper western states have very little population and tons of natural resources. Tons. The schools in Wyoming, first of all, they have a low student population, but they have a lot of coal. And their schools are unbelievable. Unbelievable, their schools. It looks like something on TV when you go in there. Like, is this a TV set? Because this really doesn't look like a school. Like, how is this a school? It's unbelievable because they have so much money, for one, because they have so few students, but they also have a lot of coal. A ton of coal. and their coal is not below ground, so they're not mining. Theirs is above ground. It's those strip mines, and you can just see as you drive by these long lines of coal. Now, obviously, they probably aren't being as productive as we have a glut of coal on the market, but that's the resources that we're talking about. Same thing if any of you drive south at any time to head down to those awesome beaches and you go by those giant what you just think, I think maybe you just think are woods with trees planted in rows, like, wow, that's cool. The trees are growing in rows. Those are harvested, and if you could slow down, don't do it because you don't want to slow down on the freeway, but if you slowed down to look, you would see in between these big giant ones probably at least 3 rows of other pines in varying heights. Pine trees, they're softwood, they grow fast, and the natural resources of the South allow those pine trees to grow tall, big, fast, strong. And if you didn't know that, those are timber. I mean, that's exactly what they're growing in those big rows for, is for timber. And again, if you could slow down, you could see varying stages of growth. We have awesome natural resources that provide for our now in the 21st century, but especially in the early 1700s. So what were that trade, and we'll finish up with this one, that triangular trade. The triangular trade is illegal trade. So please think of that triangular trade. First, it is illegal. Because who are we only allowed to trade with? Britain. That's it. Who are we allowed to buy stuff from? Britain. That's it. That's navigation laws. So when we're building this bedrock of the American identity, first and foremost, bottom is this idea of capitalism. That's first. Then we got democracy. And then we got this thing called rebellion. It is layered. It is a deep, thick layer of rebellion. Because we're only supposed to trade with England. That's it. That's who we're supposed to trade with. But we don't like that. So we're going to circumvent. We're going to go around it, and we're going to smuggle. Why? Because the bottom line is capitalism. And we can make more money if we trade with other people. And that other people we're going to trade with will be England's mortal enemy, France. So New England has fish, cotton, light manufacturing. So when we talk about fish, right, because we don't have refrigeration, and I finally had somebody ask, like, what are they doing with this fish? We dry it. It's dried fish. Right? We don't have refrigeration. We don't have any of that. So think about fish being dried like jerky, and that becomes protein. I know it's gross, but it is, and it allows, and not that fresh fish doesn't get across, but for the most part, we're drying this fish for protein. And we're selling them to the French Caribbean for molasses. What are we going to do with molasses? What? Rum. We're going to make rum, and lots of rum. Rum becomes currency. I'm sure there are people that wanted molasses, maybe to soak up with some peanut butter in their biscuits. If you haven't tried that, that's awesome. Anybody eat Karo syrup or King syrup and peanut butter and on biscuits? Oh my, you don't know what you're missing because it's delicious. Try it. Deep, thick molasses and some peanut butter, and put it on a hot, fresh biscuit. All right, let me finish this page before we go. We're going to make rum. Rum will be shipped to the West Indies. Slaves are going to be also part of this transaction, but this triangular trade is illegal, and we're doing all the things that we can to get around that triangular trade and to keep our money for ourselves.